All right. Let's dive into something that can make a huge difference in your PHP and MySQL projects. PDO fetch styles. When you're working with databases, pulling out data, it can get messy fast if you're not careful, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's like trying to fit square pegs into round holes sometimes. You can make it
Yeah.
work, but
It's not pretty.
exactly. Choosing the right PDO fetch style is all about making that data flow smoothly into your code.
And that's where this article from plus2net.com comes in clutch. It really lays it all out. How to grab exactly what you need without drowning in a sea of code.
What I find fascinating is how much flexibility PHP gives developers here. It's not just about getting the data, it's about getting it in the form that makes your life easiest.
And they start with a scenario we've all been in, needing just one record from the database. Like,
Mhm.
say you're grabbing a username based on their ID. Their example code for that is surprisingly straightforward. Even I could follow it.
Right, because in those cases, simplicity is key.
Mm.
Using fetch without any arguments, that's perfect there. Just plucking that single piece of data right out of the database.
And usually it hands it to you as an associative array, which the article does a good job explaining. It's like a dictionary, right? Column names are your keys and the data's the value. Easy peasy.
Exactly. It's intuitive, especially if you're used to working with arrays in other parts of your code. But let's say you're dealing with more than one row of data. That's where things get even more interesting.
Because nobody wants to wrangle a whole database table manually. The article digs into other fetch styles, and fetch obj really caught my eye. Sounds like a real game changer.
It absolutely can be, especially when you're dealing with large, complex data sets. Instead of an array, fetch obj gives you an object. Now you're accessing data using properties, which can make your code so much cleaner, easier to read.
And they even show the output in the article. It's like night and day compared to a big, jumbled array. Plus, they mention fetch hnum, fetch assoc, and even fetch both. It's like a whole buffet of options.
Think of it like this, right? You've got the same delicious data, but you can plate it up in different ways. Fetch hn gives you a numerically indexed array. Fetch assoc6 with those column names as keys, and fetch enso. Well, that's like asking for a fork and a spoon. You've got options.
I love that analogy. But before we get lost in all the options, when would you actually choose one of these over the others? It's got to be about more than just personal preference, right?
You're absolutely right. It's about choosing the right tool for the job. Imagine you're building an application that deals with user profiles, right?
Yeah.
And each profile has a bunch of different attributes.
Okay, yeah, I'm picturing it. Names, emails, maybe profile pictures.
Exactly. Now, if you're using fetch assoc, you're constantly having to remember, okay, which column name was that again? It can get tedious.
Yeah, I can see that.
But with fetch made obj, you can just use something like username or user email. It's so much cleaner, easier to understand at a glance.
Ah, so it's like FTTHOBJ makes your code more self-documenting in a way.
Precisely. And when you're working with a large code base, maybe collaborating with other developers, that clarity is invaluable.
That makes a ton of sense. Now, what about those other options we kind of skimmed over, fetch enum and fetch both? Are those just there for legacy reasons, or are there times when they really shine?
Well, fetchNM, that one's a bit old school. You probably won't use it as often. It gives you a numerically indexed array, which it can be useful in some very specific situations. Like maybe you're working with really simple data structures, or you need to optimize for like absolute performance in a tight loop.
Interesting. So there might actually be a performance difference there.
Potentially, yeah. It's something to benchmark if you're really trying to squeeze every ounce of speed out of your code. But for most everyday applications, the difference is going to be negligible.
Good to know. And fetch both. That one almost sounds like it's hedging its bets. Trying to be everything to everyone.
It kind of is. Fetch both, it gives you both the associative and numerical array representations of your data. So, I mean, there might be scenarios where that flexibility is helpful, but honestly, I usually find it's better to pick the style that best fits your code's overall structure and just stick with it for consistency.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But before we move on, there was one fetch style that really grabbed my attention. fetchOAZY. It's like this secret weapon in this article. It's like combining the best of both worlds, from what I'm gathering. Can you walk me through how that works in practice?
Okay, fetchAZBY. It's like the Swiss Army knife of PDO fetch styles, from what I'm gathering. It's pretty cool. Imagine you're working with a massive data set, right?
Right.
And you don't necessarily need to load all that data into memory at once. That's where fetchLazy comes in. It lets you pull in the data as you need it, which could be a huge performance win.
So instead of loading a whole table into an array, it's like streaming it in piece by piece.
Exactly. It's a bit more advanced under the hood, but yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And here's a kicker. With fetchLazy, you still get that best of both worlds thing. You can access data using object properties or array indices, depending on what works best in your code at that moment.
So it's flexible and efficient. I can definitely see why the article was highlighting this one. It's like the difference between carrying a whole toolbox around versus just the tool you need at that moment.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of having all these different fetch styles at your disposal. It's about writing code that's not just correct, but elegant, efficient.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening, actually. I feel like I've been using PDO, but not really using it. You know what I mean?
It's easy to get stuck in our ways with coding, I think. But taking the time to really explore these nuances, it can make a world of difference. Like discovering a secret shortcut that saves you tons of time and effort down the road.
Absolutely. And it makes me wonder, are there other areas in PHP and MySQL where choosing the right style can have this big of an impact?
Oh, absolutely. There's always more to learn. That's part of what makes coding so fascinating. We've only scratched the surface here, but hopefully this has given you a new appreciation for the power of PDO fetch styles.
It definitely has. So to everyone out there building with PHP and MySQL, don't just fetch your data, fetch it smart. Think about your project, the data you need, and how you want to work with it. That's how you write code that's not just good, but truly elegant.
Well said. And never stop exploring. The more you learn about these tools and techniques, the more equipped you'll be to tackle any coding challenge that comes your way.
On that note, we'll leave you to explore the wonderful world of PDO fetch styles. Happy coding, everyone.